Marcus Chun had always believed that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or weapons, but adaptability. That belief was about to be tested in ways he never imagined. The transport ship Meridian's hope shuddered violently as it dropped out of hyperspace. Emergency alarms screamed through the corridors while Marcus gripped the nearest bulkhead, his research materials scattered across the floor of his small cabin. Through the porthole, instead of the familiar blue-green marble of Earth that should have greeted them after their 3-month survey mission, he saw only the angry red surface of an unknown planet. All passengers report to emergency stations immediately. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, barely audible over the groaning metal and sparking electrical systems. Marcus grabbed his emergency pack and rushed toward the nearest escape pod bay. The ship's corridors were filled with panicked colonists and crew members, their faces pale with fear. Children cried while their parents tried to maintain calm facades that fooled no one. Dr. Sarah Kim, the expedition's xenobiologist, stumbled into Marcus as another violent shake rocked the ship. "The navigation systems are completely fried," she gasped. "We have no idea where we are." Before Marcus could respond, the lights went out entirely. Emergency lighting bathed everything in an eerie red glow as the ship's death throes echoed around them. Through the chaos, he heard Captain Rodriguez's voice one last time. "Abandoned ship. All hands abandoned ship." The escape pod launch felt like being shot from a cannon. Marcus found himself crammed into Pod 7 with 12 other survivors, including Dr. Kim and Chief Engineer Thompson. The small vessel's single viewport showed the dying transport ship growing smaller behind them, while the red planet loomed ever larger ahead. "Atmospheric readings show breathable air," Thompson reported from the pilot's seat, his voice tight with concentration. "But the energy signatures from the surface, I've never seen anything like them." As they descended through the planet's atmosphere, Marcus caught his first glimpse of their new home. The landscape below was a nightmare of jagged mountains, flowing lava rivers, and what looked like massive structures that defied any architectural logic he knew. But what made his blood run cold were the lights moving across the surface in organized patterns. "Those aren't natural formations," Dr. Kim whispered, pointing at the structures. "This planet is inhabited." The pod hit the ground hard, throwing everyone forward against their restraints. When Marcus regained consciousness, smoke was filling the small space, and Thompson was frantically working at the control panel. "Hull breach in the rear compartment," the engineer announced grimly. "We need to get out now." They stumbled out onto the alien surface under a sky the color of dry blood. 3 suns hung overhead, casting everything in harsh, overlapping shadows. The air was thin but breathable, carrying the scent of sulfur and something Marcus couldn't identify, but that made his skin crawl. "Look at this," Dr. Kim called from where she was examining some nearby rock formations. "The mineral composition is unlike anything in our databases. High concentrations of elements that shouldn't exist in stable forms." Marcus was about to respond when the ground began to vibrate beneath their feet. The vibration grew stronger, becoming a rhythmic pounding that seemed to come from all directions at once. Then they saw them. The creatures emerged from hidden passages in the rocky terrain like a nightmare made manifest. They stood 8 feet tall on powerful legs that ended in clawed feet capable of crushing stone. Their arms were longer than their legs, ending in hands that seemed designed for both delicate manipulation and devastating violence. But it was their faces that truly terrified Marcus. Intelligent eyes burned with a fierce inner light above mouths filled with teeth that had clearly evolved for tearing flesh. "Weapons," one of the other survivors whispered. "Do we have any weapons?" Thompson shook his head grimly. "Standard civilian evacuation protocols. No weapons allowed in the escape pods." The creatures had surrounded them now, moving with a coordination that spoke of intelligence and military training. Their leader, distinguished by intricate scarring across his face and arms, stepped forward and spoke in a voice like grinding stone. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear enough. They were prisoners. The march to the alien settlement took 3 hours across terrain that seemed designed to break both body and spirit. The ground alternated between sharp rocks that cut through their shoes and patches of sand so hot it burned through the soles. The creatures showed no mercy for human weakness, prodding stragglers forward with the points of spears that seemed to be made from some kind of organic material Marcus had never seen before. Dr. Kim stumbled and fell twice during the journey. Each time, Marcus helped her to her feet, earning suspicious glances from their captors. He was beginning to understand that mercy was not a concept these beings recognized. The settlement, when they finally reached it, defied every expectation Marcus had formed. Instead of primitive huts or caves, he found himself looking at a complex of structures that seemed to grow from the rock itself. The architecture was both beautiful and terrifying, with flowing lines that suggested organic growth, but proportions that could only have been planned by sophisticated minds. They were herded into a large, circular space at the center of the settlement. Hundreds of the alien creatures surrounded them, their burning eyes fixed on the humans with unmistakable hunger. Marcus realized with growing horror that they were not just prisoners, but prey. The scarred leader who had captured them raised his arms, and the crowd fell silent. When he spoke, his words carried across the space with ritualistic formality. Marcus didn't need translation to understand that some kind of judgment was taking place. Dr. Kim grabbed his arm. "Marcus, look at their weapons," she whispered urgently. He followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. The creatures carried an arsenal that made Earth's military hardware look like children's toys. Energy weapons that hummed with contained power. Bladed implements that seemed to cut the very air around them. And, most disturbing of all, devices that appeared to be combinations of technology and living tissue. "How are we supposed to survive here?" Thompson asked, his voice barely audible. "We're researchers and engineers, not soldiers." Before Marcus could answer, the crowd parted to reveal an even more imposing figure. This creature stood nearly 10 feet tall and was covered in scars that formed intricate patterns across his hide. When he walked, the ground seemed to tremble with each step. The scarred leader gestured toward the humans and spoke rapidly in their guttural language. The giant listened without expression, then walked slowly around the group of prisoners, examining each one with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating potential meals. When he stopped in front of Marcus, their eyes met. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, human and alien stared at each other across the vast gulf of species and understanding. Then the giant smiled, revealing teeth that could have severed Marcus's head with a single bite. The giant spoke a single word, and Marcus felt the weight of it even without comprehension. Whatever had just been decided, he knew their real ordeal was just beginning. They were dragged to a series of caves that had been carved into the mountainside. The chambers were barely large enough for humans to stand upright and contained no amenities whatsoever. A single hole in the floor served purposes Marcus preferred not to think about, and the only source of water was a thin trickle that seeped through cracks in the stone walls. "They're keeping us alive for something," Dr. Kim observed as they huddled together in the largest chamber. "The question is what?" Their answer came the next morning when the guards arrived with the dawn. Marcus and 5 other humans were dragged from their cells and marched to another part of the settlement. Here, the architecture was different, more utilitarian, and somehow more threatening. They found themselves in what could only be described as an arena. The floor was covered in sand that had been stained dark with substances Marcus didn't want to identify. Tiered seating rose on all sides, already filling with alien spectators whose excited chittering filled the air with menace. The giant from the previous day entered from the opposite side of the arena, but now he carried weapons. A massive blade that seemed to be made from the same organic material as everything else in this place, and a device that crackled with electrical energy. Marcus understood with perfect clarity that they were about to become entertainment. The first human thrown into the arena was Jenkins, a maintenance worker from the ship who had never hurt anyone in his life. He lasted exactly 47 seconds. Marcus counted every one of them, burning the number into his memory as a reminder of what awaited. The second was Dr. Patterson, the expedition's geologist. She tried to run, tried to use her superior speed and agility to avoid the giant's attacks. It didn't matter. The creature was faster than anything that size had any right to be, and his weapons could reach across distances that should have been safe. When they dragged Marcus into the arena, he had made a decision. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to beg. If he was going to die on this hellish world, he would die learning everything he could about his killers. The giant approached with confident, measured steps. The crowd fell silent, perhaps sensing something different about this human. Marcus stood perfectly still, watching, observing, cataloging every detail of his opponent's movement and equipment. When the attack came, it was with stunning speed. The organic blade whistled through the air where Marcus's head had been a fraction of a second earlier. He had rolled to the side, not to escape, but to get a better view of how the weapon moved, how his opponent compensated for its weight and balance. The electrical device discharged with a sound like thunder, sending bolts of energy that scorched the sand where Marcus had been standing. But he was already moving again, not away from the giant, but in a pattern that let him observe the weapon's recharge time, its effective range, the way it interfaced with its wielder's nervous system. For 10 minutes, Marcus danced with death. He took wounds, burns from near misses, and cuts from blades that came too close. But he learned. With every dodge, every roll, every desperate scramble for survival, he gathered data about his enemy. When the giant finally caught him, lifting him by the throat with one massive hand, Marcus looked into those burning eyes and smiled. "I know how your weapons work now," he said quietly, knowing the creature couldn't understand his words, but hoping it might understand his tone. "And tomorrow, I'm going to know more." Instead of crushing his windpipe as expected, the giant stared at him for a long moment. Then, impossibly, it laughed. A sound like an avalanche mixed with breaking glass, but unmistakably laughter. Marcus was thrown back into his cell, bloodied and broken, but alive. As Dr. Kim tended to his wounds with their meager supplies, he began to plan. "They underestimate us," he told the other survivors. "They think we're just prey because we don't have their strength or their weapons. But they're making a mistake." "What mistake?" Thompson asked wearily. Marcus looked around at the faces of his fellow prisoners, seeing fear and despair, but also the spark of human intelligence that had carried their species from caves to the stars. "They think survival is about being the strongest or the most heavily armed," he said. "But humans didn't become the dominant species on Earth because we could outfight everything else. We became dominant because we could think our way out of any problem." Over the following days, Marcus was thrown into the arena again and again. Each time, he learned something new. The weapons had specific energy signatures. The armor had weak points. The giants themselves had behavioral patterns that could be exploited. More importantly, he began to understand the culture that had created this place. This was not just entertainment, but a form of worship, a celebration of strength and violence that had shaped their entire civilization. The spectators weren't just watching for fun. They were participating in a religious experience. And like all religions, it had rules. Marcus began to test those rules, pushing boundaries in ways that confused and intrigued his captors. When weapons were thrown into the arena for the human prisoners to use, he ignored them, fighting instead with improvised tools made from stones and debris. When the giants expected him to show fear, he displayed curiosity. When they wanted him to run, he stood his ground and studied their techniques. The crowds began to murmur when Marcus entered the arena. The giant who served as primary executioner started to seem almost frustrated by his human opponent's refusal to behave according to the established script. But it was Dr. Kim who made the breakthrough that would change everything. "Marcus, I've been watching the guards when they think we're not paying attention," she whispered one night as they huddled together for warmth. "They're not just randomly violent. There's a pattern to their behavior, a hierarchy that governs everything they do. What kind of hierarchy? Strength-based, but not just physical strength. Combat skill, tactical intelligence, leadership ability. It's all measured and ranked according to systems we're only beginning to understand. Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to click together in his mind. They're not keeping us alive as entertainment. They're keeping us alive as test subjects. Test subject for what? For themselves, Marcus said, his voice filled with growing understanding. They want to know what makes us different. What makes humans dangerous despite our apparent weakness? The next morning brought a change in routine that confirmed Marcus's theory. Instead of being dragged directly to the arena, they were taken to a different part of the settlement where alien scientists waited with instruments and devices that looked suspiciously like medical equipment. The examination was thorough and invasive. The aliens measured everything about the human prisoners, from bone density to neural activity patterns. They tested reflexes, intelligence, problem-solving ability, and pain tolerance. Through it all, Marcus maintained his strategy of observation, learning as much about his captors as they were learning about him. When they were finally returned to their cells, Marcus had formed a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. They're trying to understand human adaptability, he explained to the other survivors. They want to know how we can be dangerous despite our physical limitations, which means they recognize that we are dangerous. That's not much comfort when we're about to be torn apart in their arena, Thompson pointed out. But it is leverage, Marcus insisted. They want something from us. That means we have something to bargain with. The next time Marcus was thrown into the arena, he did something unprecedented in the history of the settlement's gladiatorial games. When the giant approached with weapons raised, Marcus dropped to his knees and began to speak. He couldn't speak their language, so he used mathematics. With his finger, he began drawing equations in the sand. Simple at first, then increasingly complex. Physics formulas that described the energy outputs of their weapons. Engineering principles that explained how their architecture could be improved. Chemical equations that could enhance their metallurgy. The giant stopped, staring down at the symbols with obvious confusion. The crowd grew silent, sensing that something unprecedented was happening. Then, Marcus began the second part of his demonstration. Using debris from previous battles, he began to construct simple machines. A lever that could multiply force. A pulley system that could redirect energy. A spring mechanism that could store and release power with devastating efficiency. When he looked up at the giant, Marcus saw something he had never expected to see in those burning eyes. Curiosity. The gladiatorial combat that day lasted 6 hours and ended not in death, but in something that would reshape both human and alien understanding of what it meant to survive on a warworld. Marcus had gambled everything on a single premise, that intelligence was the ultimate weapon, and that even the most violent species in the galaxy would eventually recognize its value. As the giant extended a clawed hand to help him to his feet, Marcus knew that the real test was just beginning. The giant's name was Crox, and he was not what Marcus had expected from a career gladiator on a planet where violence was religion. In the 3 weeks since their unprecedented arena encounter, Marcus had learned that Crox held a position equivalent to a university professor. If universities on this world taught subjects like advanced dismemberment theory and practical applications of fear. The gladiatorial arena wasn't just entertainment. It was their highest form of academic research, a place where theories about combat, survival, and dominance were tested against living subjects. Your species confuses us, Croc said in heavily accented, but increasingly fluent English. The aliens' linguistic abilities had proven as formidable as their physical prowess, and several of them had mastered human speech within days of deciding it was worth learning. Marcus looked up from the mechanical device he was constructing, a simple but effective force multiplier made from salvaged arena debris and principles of leverage that any human engineer would have learned in their first year of study. To Crox and his colleagues, it might as well have been magic. How so? Marcus asked, making a small adjustment to the device's fulcrum point. You possess no natural weapons. Your physical strength is laughable by our standards. Your teeth cannot even tear raw meat properly. Yet your ship traveled distances that would take our best vessels decades to cover. And now you create tools that amplify force beyond what should be possible with such primitive materials. Marcus activated his device, using it to lift a stone block that weighed several times what he could manage with his bare hands. The assembled alien researchers chittered among themselves, their equivalent of excited academic discussion. Our teeth aren't designed for tearing meat because we learned to use fire to cook our food thousands of years ago, Marcus explained. We don't need natural weapons because we learned to make better ones. We're not strong individually because we learned to work together as groups. Crocs tilted his massive head. A gesture Marcus had learned indicated deep thought among his species. This concept you call learning is not the same as instinct. No, it's better than instinct. Instinct can adapt to new situations. Learning can. What Marcus didn't tell Crocs was that he was learning too, absorbing everything he could about alien technology, culture, and, most importantly, weaknesses. Every conversation was reconnaissance. Every demonstration was intelligence gathering. The aliens thought they were studying him, but Marcus was studying them right back. Dr. Kim had been assigned to a different research group, one focused on biological adaptation rather than mechanical engineering. Through carefully passed messages during their brief daily meetings, Marcus was building a comprehensive picture of their captor's society. The aliens called themselves the Crothery, which roughly translated to those who conquer in their ancient tongue. Their civilization was built on a foundation of ritualized violence that determined everything from social hierarchy to resource distribution. Weakness was not just despised, but literally incomprehensible to them. They could no more understand mercy than humans could understand echolocation. This made their fascination with humanity both promising and dangerous. The humans represented an impossible contradiction in Crothery worldview. A species that was obviously weak, yet had somehow achieved technological superiority over much stronger races. Today you will demonstrate combat applications, Crocs announced as he led Marcus to a new section of the research complex. Our warriors wish to understand how your people could defeat the Torgon Empire. Marcus's blood chilled. The Torgon Empire had been humanity's first contact with alien civilization, and the war that followed had lasted 3 brutal years before ending in human victory. If the Crothery had records of that conflict, they knew far more about humanity than he had realized. The demonstration area was filled with Crothery warriors in full battle armor, their weapons powered and ready. At the center of the space stood a series of targets and obstacles designed to test combat effectiveness. "Show us," Crocs commanded, "how weak creatures defeat strong ones." Marcus surveyed the available materials, basic tools, construction materials, electronic components that had been salvaged from their crashed escape pod. Nothing that would traditionally be considered a weapon, but everything he needed if he approached the problem correctly. "The first thing you need to understand," Marcus said loudly enough for all the assembled warriors to hear, "is that humans don't fight the same way you do." He began constructing what appeared to be a simple lever mechanism, but embedded within it were principles of mechanical advantage that could turn a human's modest strength into devastating force. While he worked, he talked, explaining concepts that were second nature to any human, but revolutionary to a species that relied primarily on brute force. "We don't try to be stronger than our enemies," he continued, adding what looked like a basic electronic component to his construction. "We try to be smarter. We don't fight fair. We fight to win." The device he created looked unimpressive, barely more sophisticated than a medieval catapult. But when he activated it, the projectile it launched struck the farthest target with enough force to shatter the armored plating that was designed to withstand Crothery weapons. The assembled warriors fell silent. In their culture, such a demonstration would have been followed by challenges, tests of dominance, ritualistic combat to establish hierarchy. Instead, Marcus did something that left them completely bewildered. He began teaching. "The key is understanding force multiplication," he explained, beginning construction of a second device. Every tool is a way of applying human intelligence to overcome physical limitations. For the next 4 hours, Marcus conducted an impromptu engineering seminar for an audience of alien warriors who could have torn him apart without effort, but found themselves hanging on every word. He demonstrated principles of physics, chemistry, and mechanical engineering that their civilization had never developed because their natural advantages had made such innovations unnecessary. By the time the session ended, Marcus had accomplished something unprecedented in Crothery history. He had made warriors think like engineers. Crocs approached him as the other aliens filed out, their conversations animated by concepts they were still trying to process. "Your people," the giant said slowly, "they all possess this knowledge?" "Basic principles, yes," Marcus replied. "We teach these concepts to our children before they reach adulthood." "Children," Crocs repeated the word as if it were foreign to him. "Young Crothery learn to fight. Human young learn to build, among other things. We learn to solve problems, to work together, to adapt to new situations. Fighting is just one possible solution to a problem, and usually not the best one." That night, Marcus was moved to new quarters. Instead of a barren cave, he found himself in a room that was actually comfortable by human standards. There was a bed, a desk, even a small food preparation area stocked with items that his guards had determined were safe for human consumption. Dr. Kim was waiting for him when he arrived. "They moved me here this morning," she explained, "along with Thompson and Martinez. I think our status just changed from experimental subjects to valuable resources." "What have you learned about their biology?" Marcus asked immediately. "Fascinating and terrifying in equal measure," Kim replied. "Their muscle density is approximately 3 times human normal. Their bone structure is reinforced with mineral deposits that make them incredibly durable, and their nervous system processes information at speeds that explain their ridiculous reflexes. Weaknesses? Several, actually. Their caloric requirements are enormous, which means they need to eat almost constantly to maintain their strength. Their sensory organs are optimized for their current environment, but they'd be nearly blind in Earth-normal lighting conditions. And most importantly, their brain structure is heavily specialized for combat processing, which makes them incredibly efficient fighters but poor at abstract reasoning." Marcus smiled grimly. "So they're naturally gifted warriors who never needed to develop the intellectual tools that human survival demanded." "Exactly, which explains why our technology seems so impossible to them. They never needed to innovate because they could always just overpower their problems." Over the following days, Marcus's new role became clearer. He wasn't just a research subject anymore. He was becoming a teacher. Crothery scientists, engineers, and even military leaders came to observe his demonstrations and ask questions about human methodology. The questions revealed as much about his captors as his answers revealed about humanity. They wanted to understand not just what humans could do, but how they thought about problems. The concept of approaching a challenge from multiple angles simultaneously was foreign to them. The idea of accepting temporary weakness in order to gain long-term advantage made no sense in their cultural context. But they were learning. Marcus began to see changes in how they approached their own technology. Small modifications to weapons that increased efficiency rather than raw power. Architectural improvements that used structural principles rather than just massive building materials. Most significantly, the beginnings of collaborative research groups rather than individual specialists working in isolation. "You are changing us," Crocs observed during one of their daily sessions. "This was not intended." "Change is what living things do," Marcus replied. "The ones that don't change get eaten by the ones that do. On our world, the strong eat the weak. This has been true for millions of years. On our world, the smart eat the strong, and the smart learn from everyone they meet, even their enemies." That evening, Marcus made a discovery that changed everything about his situation. While exploring his new quarters, he found a communication device that had been left either by accident or as a test. The device was connected to the settlement's information network, and, with some careful experimentation, Marcus was able to access databases that revealed the true scope of the situation. Humanity wasn't alone in the galaxy. There were dozens of intelligent species, most of which had been conquered and absorbed by various Crothry clans over the past several thousand years. The Crothry weren't just warriors. They were the galaxy's dominant military force, spreading from world to world in an endless expansion that had consumed entire civilizations. But the databases also revealed something else. The expansion had stalled. For the first time in their history, the Crothry had encountered species that could match their military might. The Torgon Empire had been their most recent major conquest, but even that victory had cost them heavily. Now they faced enemies with technology and tactics that their traditional approaches couldn't overcome. That's why they were so interested in humanity. They had captured record from the Human-Torgon War and realized that humans had accomplished something the Crothry themselves had never managed. They had defeated a superior force through pure tactical innovation. Marcus stared at the data streaming across the alien interface and felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival anymore, or even for the other human prisoners. His actions here could determine the fate of every free species in the galaxy. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Marcus's quarters. Instead of Crocs or one of the usual researchers, he found himself face to face with an alien whose scars and bearing marked him as someone of tremendous importance in Crothry society. "I am Vorthak, war leader of the Crimson Claw clan," the massive creature announced in perfect English. "You will explain to me how your weak species defeated the Torgon battle fleets." Marcus had been expecting this moment since he first realized how much the Crothry knew about humanity's military history. The question wasn't whether they would eventually want detailed tactical information, but whether they would try to take it by force or offer him something in return. "That's a complex subject," Marcus replied carefully. "It would take considerable time to explain properly. Time I will give you, in exchange for knowledge that could advance Crothry military doctrine." "What kind of exchange?" Vorthak's scarred face twisted into what Marcus had learned was the Crothry equivalent of a smile. "Your people will be returned to Earth unharmed. Your ship will be repaired and resupplied for the journey. You have my oath as a war leader." It was more than Marcus had dared hope for, but also exactly the kind of offer that made him suspicious. "And in return, you will teach our strategists everything you know about human military thinking. Tactics, logistics, strategic planning, technological development. Everything." Marcus pretended to consider the offer while his mind raced through the implications. Teaching the galaxy's most successful conquerors how to think like humans could doom every free world in known space. But refusing might doom his fellow prisoners immediately. "I'll need guarantees," he said finally. "Not just promises, but verifiable proof that my people are safe and that arrangements for our return are actually being made." "Agreed. But there will be limits to my patience." "Understood. I'll need access to your military archives to understand your current tactical doctrine. I'll need to observe your training methods and weapon systems. And I'll need to work with your best strategists directly." Vorthak's eyes narrowed. "You make demands of a war leader? I make requirements for effective teaching. You can't learn human tactics without understanding how they differ from your own methods." For a moment, Marcus thought he had pushed too far. The alien's hand moved toward the weapon at his side, and every instinct screamed at him to run or fight or do anything other than stand there calmly waiting for a response. Then Vorthak laughed, the same sound of breaking stone that Crocs had made in the arena weeks earlier. "Perhaps there is something to learn from creatures that make demands of their betters," the war leader said. "Very well. You will have access to what you require." As Vorthak left, Marcus began planning the most dangerous game of his life. He was going to teach the galaxy's greatest predators how to hunt like humans, while secretly learning everything he could about their weaknesses and transmitting that information to Earth through methods he had yet to devise. The irony wasn't lost on him. The Crothry thought they were capturing human knowledge to make themselves stronger. What they didn't understand was that the very act of learning from humans was already changing them in ways that made them more vulnerable than they had ever been in their long history of conquest. Marcus smiled as he began organizing his thoughts for the first lesson. The Crothry were about to learn that the most dangerous human weapon wasn't any particular technology or tactic. It was the simple willingness to teach their enemies how to think. 6 months after his capture, Marcus Chin stood in the war room of the most powerful military force in the galaxy, surrounded by alien strategists who hung on his every word. What they didn't know was that he was methodically dismantling their entire civilization from the inside out. The holographic display showed the current state of the Crothry expansion front, a three-dimensional map of conquered worlds stretching across a quarter of the galaxy. Red markers indicated active military campaigns. Yellow showed recently pacified systems, and green marked worlds that had been fully integrated into the Crothry Empire. Your current strategy is fundamentally flawed, Marcus announced to the assembled war leaders, a statement that 6 months ago would have resulted in his immediate execution. Now it sparked intense discussion among the most powerful beings in Crothry society. War leader Vorthak leaned forward in his massive chair. Explain. You're fighting the same war you've been fighting for 1,000 years, but your enemies have evolved. Look at these casualty reports from the Andorian front. Marcus manipulated the holographic controls with the ease of someone who had spent months studying Crothry technology. Your losses have increased by 300% over the past 5 years, not because your enemies have become stronger, but because they've learned to think differently about warfare. General Thraxis, the most decorated military commander in Crothry history, growled his displeasure. The Andorian rebels are cowards who hide behind their technology instead of facing us honorably in battle. Exactly my point, Marcus said with a smile that he hoped looked encouraging rather than predatory. You keep expecting your enemies to fight the way you fight, but successful warfare is about adapting to what works, not what feels honorable. He gestured to the tactical display, highlighting several recent human military campaigns that the Crothry had studied obsessively. When humans fought the Torgon Empire, we didn't try to match their strengths. We identified their weaknesses and exploited them ruthlessly. Tell us, Vorthak commanded. Marcus had been preparing for this moment for months, carefully crafting a narrative that would satisfy Crothry curiosity while serving his own purposes. The Torgans were bigger than us, stronger than us, and had better weapons. Sound familiar? Several of the assembled aliens chittered acknowledgement. So we didn't fight them directly. We studied their supply lines and attacked their logistics networks. We analyzed their communication protocols and fed them false information. We learned their battle doctrines and consistently did the opposite of what they expected. Cowards' tactics, General Thraxis spat. Winning tactics, Marcus corrected firmly. The Torgans had ships that could destroy entire human fleets in direct combat. But those ships needed fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and maintenance facilities. We destroyed their ability to support their fleet, and their superior firepower became irrelevant. He manipulated the display to show theoretical applications of these principles to current Crothry conflicts. Look at the Centauri Alliance. You've been trying to break their defensive positions with direct assault for 2 years. But their entire strategy depends on supply deliveries from their industrial worlds 3 systems away. Marcus highlighted the vulnerable supply routes with tactical overlays that made the strategic opportunities obvious even to the most traditionally minded Crothry commanders. Instead of throwing warriors against fortified positions, you could achieve complete victory by capturing or destroying 3 cargo facilities, he continued. The Alliance forces would be forced to surrender within weeks. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This was exactly the kind of tactical thinking that had made humans dangerous despite their physical limitations, and it was precisely what the Crothry military had never developed because they had never needed to. Implement this strategy immediately, Vorthak ordered. Report results in 1 standard cycle. As the meeting broke up, Marcus felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and guilt that had become constant companions. Every tactical insight he shared would save Crothry lives and cost the lives of beings fighting for their freedom. But it also brought him closer to his ultimate goal. That evening, Marcus made his way to the restricted section of the research complex where Dr. Kim was conducting her biological studies. The security measures that had once kept him confined now worked in his favor, creating private spaces where he could meet with the other human survivors without alien observation. "How many does that make?" Kim asked as soon as he entered her laboratory. 17 major tactical revisions to their military doctrine, Marcus replied, plus hundreds of smaller innovations in logistics, communications, and equipment maintenance. And they still don't suspect? Why would they? From their perspective, they're learning valuable skills that make them better at what they've always done. They don't understand that every change makes them more vulnerable to counter-tactics. Dr. Kim gestured toward the biological samples that covered her work tables. "I've been having similar success with their medical and biological research. They're so focused on immediate applications that they can't see long-term consequences." Marcus examined the various specimens and data readouts that represented months of careful work. Kim had been studying Crothry physiology under the pretense of developing better medical treatments for their warriors. What she had actually been doing was mapping every biological weakness and vulnerability that could be exploited by human biochemical warfare. Their immune systems are incredibly robust against naturally occurring pathogens, Kim explained, but they've never encountered anything like Earth bacteria. A modified strain of common influenza would spread through their population like wildfire. "We're not going to commit genocide," Marcus said firmly. "Of course not. But the threat of biological warfare could be enough to force a ceasefire when the time comes." Thompson appeared from the adjoining workshop where he had been reverse engineering Crothry technology. The chief engineer looked exhausted, but triumphant. "I've cracked their manufacturing protocols," he announced. "Their entire industrial base depends on automated systems that follow pre-programmed patterns. If someone knew the right code sequences, they could shut down production across multiple star systems simultaneously." "How?" Marcus asked. Thompson activated a small device that projected technical schematics into the air between them. Every Crothry factory uses the same basic control architecture. It's incredibly efficient, but completely standardized. They never considered the possibility that someone might use their own efficiency against them. Marcus studied the technical specifications with growing excitement. "Can you create a virus that would propagate through their industrial network?" "Already have. But deploying it would require access to their central communication hub, and that's in the most heavily defended facility on the planet. Then, that's where we need to go." Kim looked at him as if he had suggested swimming in lava. "Marcus, that facility is protected by the best warriors in Crothry society. Even if we could somehow fight our way in, which is impossible, the security measures would detect us before we got within 100 meters. Who said anything about fighting our way in? I'm a trusted advisor to the war leaders now. They give me access to anything I request for my tactical research." "This is insane," Thompson protested. "Even if you could get into the facility, how would you deploy a computer virus without them noticing?" Marcus smiled with the confidence of someone who had been planning this moment for months. "Because I'm not going to deploy it during a covert infiltration. I'm going to deploy it during an official demonstration of human tactical doctrine." The next morning, Marcus requested access to the Central Command facility for what he described as a comprehensive analysis of Crothry strategic communications. The request was granted immediately, along with full technical support and security clearance. The command facility was everything Thompson had described and more. The central hub controlled not just military communications, but also industrial coordination, resource allocation, and transportation networks across dozens of star systems. It was the nerve center of the entire Crothry Empire, and Marcus was being given a guided tour by the highest-ranking technical specialists in their civilization. "Impressive," he commented as they showed him the massive computer cores that processed information for billions of beings across multiple worlds. "But I can see several vulnerabilities in your network architecture. The Crothery technicians exchanged glances. After months of working with humans, they had learned to take such observations seriously. Explain, the senior technician demanded. Marcus began an impromptu lecture on information security, describing theoretical attacks that could compromise network integrity and suggesting improvements that would make their systems more robust. As he spoke, he gestured frequently toward the main control interfaces, occasionally touching screens or input devices to illustrate his points. None of the Crothery noticed that each touch was actually uploading carefully crafted code fragments that Thompson had embedded in the cybernetic implants they used to interface with their technology. By the time the lecture ended, Marcus had introduced 17 separate viral programs into their network infrastructure, each one designed to activate under specific conditions. Your suggestions will be implemented immediately, the senior technician announced. The Empire's gratitude for human tactical insights continues to grow. 3 days later, Marcus stood once again in the war room surrounded by alien strategists. But this time the atmosphere was very different. Reports were flooding in from across the Crothery Empire, each one describing the same impossible phenomenon. The Centauri Alliance has surrendered, General Thraxis reported with barely contained excitement. Your tactical recommendations achieved complete victory with minimal Crothery casualties. Similar reports followed from other fronts where Marcus's suggestions had been implemented. The Crothery military machine was achieving victories faster and more efficiently than ever before in their history. Human strategic thinking is revolutionizing our capabilities, War Leader Vorthak declared. The Empire owes you a debt that cannot be measured. I'm glad to be of service, Marcus replied, his voice carefully neutral. Though I should mention that I've been working on some additional research that might interest you. Continue. I've been analyzing communication patterns across your empire, looking for ways to optimize information flow between command structures and frontline units. I think I've found some significant improvements, but I'd like to run a comprehensive test of the entire network to verify my theories. Vorthak didn't hesitate. Granted, use whatever resources you require. Marcus bowed respectfully, hiding his smile until he had left the war room. In 36 hours, when a network analysis was scheduled to begin, Thompson's viral programs would activate simultaneously across every major Crothery facility in the galaxy. The programs wouldn't cause immediate damage. Instead, they would begin collecting information about military movements, industrial capacity, defensive installations, and population centers, then transmitting that data in carefully disguised packets toward the coordinates where Earth's deep space monitoring stations would be listening. More importantly, the programs would create hidden backdoors in every critical system, allowing future access that could be used to coordinate actions when the time came for humanity to respond to the Crothery threat. But the most crucial element of Marcus's plan wasn't technological. It was psychological. Everything he had taught the Crothery had been carefully designed to make them dependent on human strategic thinking. They were winning battles with human tactics, but those same tactics were making them predictable to anyone who understood the underlying principles. That evening, Marcus gathered with the other human survivors for what he knew would be their final meeting before everything changed. Tomorrow we find out if 6 months of preparation will be enough, he told them. What happens if this doesn't work? Kim asked. Then, we tried our best, and we die knowing that Earth will at least have warning about the Crothery threat. And if it does work? Marcus looked around at the faces of his fellow prisoners, people who had endured months of captivity with courage and determination that would have made any human proud. If it works, then we'll have accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. We'll have defeated the most powerful military force in the galaxy without firing a single shot. Thompson laughed grimly. Leave it to humans to win a war by teaching the enemy how to fight. That's exactly what we're going to do, Marcus agreed. The Crothery think they're learning to fight like humans. What they're actually learning is to fight exactly the way humans expect them to fight. As his friends dispersed to their quarters for what might be their last night on the alien world, Marcus stood alone in his room and looked out at the stars visible through his window. Somewhere out there, Earth continued its peaceful existence, unaware that its fate might soon depend on whether a small group of shipwrecked humans could turn the galaxy's greatest predators into their own worst enemies. Tomorrow would bring either triumph or disaster. But either way, Marcus knew that he had kept faith with the fundamental human principle that had carried their species from caves to the stars. When faced with a stronger enemy, don't try to outfight them. Outsmart them.